This is the executive outline of the presentation, and I will take liberty to show a small executive summary of the entire presentation before we go into details. By way of introduction, prior to 1900, the country called Nigeria today was a collection of independent ethnic homelands that existed contiguously with each other. The major problem that was faced by these homeland states were devastating slave rates, especially in the northern part of the country, and intertribal wars. Those were the major issues that characterized the ethnic homelands that existed between before 1900. And colonial administration began in earnest from 1900 to 1963, when British colonial administration put these ethnic homelands together in a three-stepwise amalgamation process, beginning with creating the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria in 1900 to comprise of Hausa land, Kanuri land, and the lands of the diverse ethnic groups in the Middle Belt, bringing them together as the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria. At that point in time, the Oil Rivers Protectorate was created down south, with Lagos already existing as a standalone colony. But by 1906, Lagos Colony and Oil Rivers Protectorate were brought together as the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria, which led to the third level of amalgamation on 1st January 1914 by bringing the Northern and the Southern Protectorate together to a single territorial entity called Nigeria as it is today.
Sorry, sir, if I may just point out, could you kindly increase your volume? Some of our brethren could not hear you clearly. We are having a problem hearing you.
The period lasted, the colonial administration in Nigeria lasted a total of 64 years between 1900 and 1963. Thereafter, there was a democratic administration in Nigeria that began from 1st October 1963 and lasted until 14th January 1966 for a period of just 2 years, 3 months, and 14 days, after which military administration took over. Between 15th January 1966 to date, we have had several administrations between the military and the civilians, but all of them, I group them as junta administration, given that none of them qualified to carry the appellation of a democratic governance system in Nigeria. This much details we will see as we make progress. In conclusion,
sorry, sir. Maybe yes, if you unplug the that device and speak directly to the device, it might be better.
Is it better now?
Yes, it's better now if it can be sustained.
It's better?
Yes, this one is better if it can be sustained like this.
Okay. So by word of conclusion, we'll be looking at, do we now have a chance to cross over to democracy? Given that between 1900 to 2024, democracy lasted in Nigeria for only 2 years, 3 months, and 14 days. Any period before then was colonial administration, which was created by force of arms. Thereafter, it was military administration, also taken power by force of arms. So do we now have a chance to cross over to democratic rule in Nigeria? Or are we continuing with the junta administration as it is today? This will form the basis of our discussion as we move forward to see the details of each presentation outline. The Federal Republic of Nigeria is a democratic entity that was formed by providence of colonialism from 1900 to achieve political sphere of influence by the colonialists. It is time for it to do a reset, to go back to full democratic rule based on the self-rule that was initiated on 1st of October 1963 by a parliamentary process after the ethnic nationalities gathered in Lagos in July 25 to 26 to agree that colonialism should go, and we will begin a process of self-rule given the constitution that was enacted on 1st October 1963. The Federal Republic of Nigeria, as it stands today, consists of diverse territorial homelands of ethnic nationalities that are roughly zoned into 6 national geopolitical zones. So for 14 years, from 1900, the colonial administration put together territorial entities that were run basically on a statecraft system that was synonymous with monarchy. And so the focus of colonial administration was to create a democratic institution, democratic governance in Nigeria. This much the colonialists achieved by waging wars against the diverse ethnic homeland nationalities. 2 wars stand out in the example I have on the screen. The Sokoto War of 20th March 1903. This was a war that the colonial administration confronted the monarchy of Sokoto under the Fulani monarchy, who resisted the need to form Nigeria as a single territorial entity. Lugard marched to Sokoto on the 20th of March with his military forces and was met with a stiff opposition, but he conquered them and issued a statement that same day, and then selected a new monarch that same day. By the following day, 21st of March 1903, he gave a full brief of what the colonial administration seeks to achieve in Nigeria by creating a single territorial entity. And a new monarch of Sokoto was installed under the leadership of the colonial administration. One statement is very clear. He told them, you have acquired your monarchy by conquest. Today, that conquest has fallen to the conquest of the British monarchy. All of you are reduced to the same baseline of subjects of the British monarchy. The second important war took place in my little corner of my homeland in Darfur on 25th July 1908. That was when the colonial forces came to my local community and subdued my people to accept colonialism. And that marked the beginning of colonial administration. Of course, as you will recall, from 1851, Lagos was already a standalone colony under the leadership of John Beecroft. Those 14 years were devoted to planning the future of a country called Nigeria as a single democratic territorial entity. In the next 8 years, from 1914 to 1921, Nigeria was brought together as a single territorial entity. We were still reeling out of the loss of ethnic nationalities homeland to colonial hegemony. But those were years for the colonialists to organize their enterprise thoroughly, which they did. And by 1922, constitutional governance began in Nigeria by the colonial constitution of Clifford and subsequent constitution that came to strengthen constitutional arrangement in the newfound country called Nigeria. 3 other constitutions of Richards in 1946, Macpherson in 1951, and Littleton in 1954 were all trial and error process to immerse the spirit of constitutional rule in the enterprise created as Nigeria by the colonialists. It introduced a lot of constitutional conferences to introduce the ethnic nationalities to have a buy-in. Elections were introduced, various commissions were set up. Fiscal commissions were set up to inquire into the fiscal operations of the new country, Nigeria. Another commission, like the William Commission, was set up to inquire into the structure of the country that had been created by the colonial effort. And by 1st October 1963, after the July meeting of ethnic nationalities in Lagos, a brand new constitution that was created by Nigerians for Nigeria was made. And so from that day, self-rule began in Nigeria. And this self-rule was founded upon the 1963 Constitution. From then to now, there are arguments that we have had 4 governing republics. We have had about 9 military administrations. But these are issues that are subject to debate. As for me, I think that given what we saw from the executive summary, democracy lasted for only 2 years. That, for me, is safely the republic we can refer to in Nigeria. Beyond that, any other governing administration was either civilian or military, based purely on military decree and no constitution. What has passed by way of constitution that was handed over by the military is simply a military decree. And the document called constitution was just an attachment, a schedule. So the civilians governed based on military decree that brought them into power. We had a chance in 1993 when we thought the military administration was going to put together a full-fledged elected governing leadership at various levels, who will now make a decision by a parliamentary process to reconnect to the real democratic foundation of 1963 to carry on. Unfortunately, that effort was not fulfilled. It was failed along the line. Yet, we still call it a republic. That is debatable. Now, this is the beginning of colonial administration, as we have said. It all began with flag planting explorers, Mungo Park, Christopher Columbus, and other explorers who merely took pleasure in exploring the lands around the world and got back to their home country to tell the story of what they found and planted the flags of their country. Thereafter, merchants took interest to say, now you have found territories. We want to market our wealth. So there was the need to protect trade interests, which eventually led to political sphere of influence that brought about colonialism, that put together the diverse ethnic groups into a single territorial entity that we have today as Nigeria. Questions have been asked elsewhere. Why did the British administration have to bring such a vast land together? I think it has to do partly with the wars that existed between UK and France. There was a century-long war, I think in the 14th century, and a decade-long war in the 19th century. Those feelings and animosities were still there, each country trying to outsmart the other. And finally, the Berlin Conference that began in November 1884 and ended in February 1885. Those were strong reasons why political sphere of interest became very important to European powers. And the four colonial constitutions that were a litmus test for setting up Nigeria as a single entity at the Clifford Constitution of 1922, Richard 46, by Ferguson 51, and the Littleton 54. These constitutions introduced elections, order and council legislative processes, fiscal operations, political power devolution, resource control, legal and regulatory framework. This is the era of democratic governance in Nigeria. From 1st October 1963 to 14th January 1966, for a period of 2 years, 3 months, 14 days. Democracy was simply just taking off. It has not grown yet. It has not matured. It has not expanded. It witnessed only one single election in 1964. Now, shall we consider this period as the ancient landmark that our fathers have set from which we should not depart from? You could see this in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 28 is clearly defined. Our forefathers created this process through the ethnic conference of July 25 and 26 in Lagos, which mandated the parliament that was already in existence to go ahead and create this constitution. So for me, this is the constitution that we, the people of Nigeria, created for ourselves, having agreed that we should come together to form a federal republic. The preamble of the 1963 Constitution is clearly indicated, and surprisingly, any other document referred to as a Constitution of Nigeria, besides this one, carries exactly the same preamble. The 1963 Constitution abolished monarchy. Monarchy, first of what existed before the colonial rule. The diverse ethnic groups were governed mostly by monarchy as a system of governance or a system of community organizing. So the 1963 Constitution abolished monarchy, not just the British monarchy that was ruling over us through colonial administration. Our own homeland monarchies were also abolished and reduced to non-state level of governance. It established a republic, enacted and enthroned an autonomous constitution via the Lagos Constitutional Conference of July 25 to 26, which was attended by ethnic nationalities of Nigeria. So the sovereign goodwill of our fathers created the agreement for us to come together based on the principle of universal adult suffrage, which is a symbol or a DNA for democratic rule, because a parliament was elected through partisan process based on the principle of universal adult suffrage. So that is it. There was no usurpation of power by force, as it were with colonial rule or either with military rule. The 1963 Constitution in Chapter 1, Section 4, Subsection 1, has a process by which the Constitution could be altered, which is the DNA of the Constitution. If you want to alter me, please let it be by a parliamentary process, clearly indicated. The parliament will do that, and then with a concurrence from the federating units, at least 50% of the members of the federating units should agree with the position of the parliament. As at that time, there were 5 federating units, the federal government and the 4 regional governments. So there was a need for at least just 2, making 50% of the other federating units to concur with the parliamentary process to amend the constitution. So anything other than that process will not be tantamount or be accepted as amending that constitution. Chapter 10 of the same, chapter 11 rather, of the same constitution made a specific provision for transition. Transition first from ethnic homeland statecraft to colonial rule, and from colonial rule to now constitutional governance. There were provisions to repeal certain constitutional instruments. Those are colonial constitutions. I will probably be safe to argue that our homeland statecraft was based on an unwritten constitution. There was no document as a constitution to refer to. So largely, any constitutional, colonial constitution that had a binding effect, at that point in time, the provision is you can do this transition to abrogate them and begin on your own. Then identify those things that are relevant and save them to continue with your governance arrangement with the new constitution you have made for yourself. There were certain laws that we could not throw them away, but adapt them to reflect our cultural traits. And so many other provisions were provided under the transition clause of chapter 11 of the Constitution, which means that same transition provision would have been utilized by the military administration to allow a reconnect to the 1963 Constitution in order to restore democracy in Nigeria. Rather than do that, they did a different thing and gave a decree. And we ruled, the civilian administration run by that decree, even though it is called constitution. So it's arguable. Was it truly a constitution? To alter the 1960 or any legitimate constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, a parliamentary process is the focus of alteration, not by creating a new constitution. The DNA of the constitution or democracy is the cryptic fulcrum upon which universal adult suffrage is based by partisan process. That is the process to alter the constitution. And the will says parliamentary process. I give you an example. The military will normally suspend the constitution and ignore the amendment process. Take this as an example. A burglar has attacked a home and made some damages. The owner of the home will survive that and mend those places. He will never have to pull down the whole house and rebuild it again because an intruder has come in. I see the need to get back to 1963 Constitution as symptoms similar to dealing with an aftermath of burglary by an intruder. Now, 15th January 1966 was the day junta administration began in Nigeria, but the military coup d'etat that announced itself by the executors. This was the simple statement that shook the foundation of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to this day. In the name of the Supreme Council of the Revolution of the Nigerian Armed Forces, I, Major Chukwuma Nzegu, hereby declare martial law over Nigeria. That ended the 1963 Republican Constitution that we, the people, created. In just 194 days in office, the military head of state, General Aguiyi Ironsi, governed Nigeria by decrees. These decrees are clearly the burden and yoke in double portion upon the shoulder and the neck of democracy in Nigeria. Check that in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 27, and see what do we need to do with such a burden and such a yoke. Decree number 1 simply suspended the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It never abrogated that Constitution at all. And yet, it ignored the transitional clause when it was time to hand over in 1979. Decree number 34 changed the democratic structure of governance to a unitary system of governance, thereby killing democracy or placing yoke and burden upon the shoulder and the neck of democracy by decree number 104 of 1979, rather than going back to abrogate decree number 1 and go to the transitional provision of 1963 Constitution and make amendment to reflect realities as at 1979 to continue with democracy. They simply installed a civilian administration based on decree number 104 of 1979. And that administration lasted until it was pushed out. Another opportunity came in 1999. Rather than exploiting chapter 11 of the 1963 Constitution to look at the transitional clause and allow a reconnection to bring back democracy on board, the military administration simply enacted decree number 24 of 1999 and allowed the civilian administration to govern based on that decree number 24. So the two civilian administrations or two episodes of civilian administrations in Nigeria so far were executed based on decrees and not based on any democratic constitution. A number of speakers have said, especially the 1999 process, there was a decree number 24 that simply carried a schedule. It is that schedule that's being referred to as a constitution. The 1979 process was a bit elaborate. A constitution drafting committee was set up, we saw it. A constituent assembly came into place, we saw it. But at the end of the day, they failed to exploit the transitional provision of 1963 Constitution in chapter 11 and went ahead to enact a decree number 104 and say, we made you a civilian administration. So this is the yoke and the burden that is upon the shoulder and the neck of democracy in Nigeria. As Christians, shall we rely on Isaiah chapter 10, verse 27 to deal with that? Dealing with that will simply call for an abrogation or a repeal of decree number 1 of 1966, decree number 34 of 1966, decree number 104 of 1979, decree number 24 of 1999. Then we can now reconnect to 1963 and make amendments to reflect realities that are already on ground. These are the two periods of military handover to civilian administration, in which we are told that each handover has a constitution. General Olusegun Obasanjo enacted decree number 104 of 1979, which is now being referred to as 1979 Constitution. General Abdulsalami Abubakar enacted decree number 24 of 1999, which is being referred to as the Constitution of Nigeria 1999, for which there is an effort in place to amend it. My understanding is that all the junta administrations failed to review the 1963 Constitution. Rather, they attempted to create new ones. There was no basis for that. We had a chance in 1993 to probably connect or reconnect to 1963 Constitution. That process was aborted. Yet, we still call it a republic. That is subject to debate. The democratic turning point and failed nexus with 1963 autonomous constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria occurred in 1993. Take a look at the preambles of the 1979, 1999, 1963 constitutions as it were. The preamble is the same. What was the basis for attempting to do a new one? Not needless. I consider military rule to be similar with colonial rule. I have no problem with them. They have existed as part of the scar on democracy. A scar on anybody's body will not be a reason for a person to seek to die. No. If a wound has healed, it's only a scar that reminds you you were once injured. So the colonial rule, military rule are simply scars upon democracy. So changes that occurred between these administrations were simply about creation of states, creation of local governments, resource control, unitary system, absence of NAS. These are realities that could be identified and linked to 1963 Constitution to bring it up to date. And we continue with our democratic rule. By way of conclusion, we are now at a time that I call a mongrel at a cost. It's time for democracy to now bind junta rule in Nigeria. Matthew chapter 12, verse 29 says, how can you enter into the house of a strong man? You need to bind him first. How do we bind junta rule over democracy? There should be a repeal of decree number 1 of 1966, a repeal of decree number 34 of 1966, a repeal of decree 104 of 1979, a repeal of decree 24 of 1999, in order to cross over to democracy, to reconnect with 1963 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Have we seen an administration or a junta administration that is capable of doing that? That is a question for us to explore. Because it is funny that all the so-called 1979, 1999 constitutions see their preambles and see the preamble of 1963 Constitution. They are the same. So my thoughts are that as a Christian body, let's look for the relevant issues to address and deal with them. Number one priority is the landmark established by our fathers should not be altered. That is the 1963 Constitution. Number two, now that we are contending with junta administrations from 15th January 1966 to date, what do we need to do? Let's repeal the yoke and the burden, which are defined by these decrees and maybe some other ones that exist in some other statute. But these four are explicit foundation of the junta administration that has held Nigeria at the jugular since January 15, 1966. The civilian administration was simply a military administration by civilians based on decree. So let's look at Matthew chapter 12, verse 29, and deal with these four decrees. By the time we are done, I believe that we will have a chance to cross over to democracy. And if the incumbent administration will take that challenge and bite the iron, it will be a legacy that, yes, we have a parliament elected based on the principle of universal adult suffrage by partisan politics. They are competent to repeal these ones and reconnect us to democratic foundation of 1963. Let's begin to nurture democracy in Nigeria and make it a basis of our togetherness. We will now see more clearly to evaluate the structure and the need and the basis to continue along that path or to redefine our path. There are options of redefining our path if we will not continue along that path. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention and to thank you for the opportunity extended to me to share these thoughts with you in the hope and belief that as a body of Christ, we will rise to the challenge of our Christian values, ethics, and morals to enthrone peace and prosperity in the Federal Republic of Nigeria that works for all. I thank you very much for the time.
May we all say amen and thank you.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Amen. Amen.
Bless you.
Bless you, sir.
Bless you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
Bless you,
Amen.
sir.
Amen.
Amen.
Very good.
Bless
Thank you for this
eye-opening lecture.
Thank you, sir.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Jonathan Akun, the Galadima Dafu, for that presentation on the way out for Nigeria. In summary, what we have been informed tonight is that Nigeria actually has an authentic constitution that was negotiated and introduced in 1963. And that constitution was not abrogated by Decree 1 of 1966. That constitution was merely suspended. So it is in the cooler. So if Nigeria is having crisis constitutional dispute today, Akun is proposing that we should simply return to that constitution that was negotiated by the founding fathers of Nigeria with all the ethnic nationalities. Then you can take it up from there. That is the position that he has presented today, and he has given us a rich historical background into how Nigeria developed even before the amalgamation and how we got to where we are today. One thing is clear. He agrees there is constitutional dispute, and the constitutional dispute must be resolved. And the 1999 Constitution is not the way to go. That one remains consistent. In the comments of the pastor who shared with us yesterday, and also our speaker tonight, the 1999 Constitution is an illegitimate document. So what we are now looking at is, what is the strategy to dismantle it? Something that will achieve the quickest and lasting result that all of us seek. So once again, sir, we say thank you very much for the presentation. It is recorded, it is on YouTube, and we are also recording it on the cloud, so that if anyone wants to hear it again, it is possible for you to have access to the entire presentation once again. But right now, we shall pray, because this is a prayer conference. The purpose of what we are doing is to get knowledge, get information, so that we can know what to pray about. In the next 20 minutes, we shall be going into prayers, and Pastor Chijioke Maduka is going to lead us in prayers for the next 20 minutes. So we hand over to Pastor Chijioke. After him, Professor Contain will take over and he will round up for tonight. Pastor Chijioke, over to you, sir. God bless you, sir.
God bless you, sir. Praise the Lord. We want to thank our speaker once again for this very rich presentation. God has begun to open our eyes as intercessors from yesterday to see where our problem lies. And today again, the Lord, through his servant, has thrown more light into the crisis that has held Nigeria bound ever since the process that should have kept us going together was interrupted. I want us to first begin by thanking God for what he has opened up to us today. When you get to know the truth, it makes it a lot easier for you to move ahead. But when the truth is not known, you will continue to grope in the dark. The unfortunate thing is that what we are hearing is not open to majority of our people. In fact, a lot of the people that are actually running things in government are ignorant of these realities. And so they just keep moving around the circle in darkness. When a blind man is leading anybody, you are sure you will fall inside a ditch. And that's what we are suffering. But thank God for this season that God has appointed to help us. Help is coming from the sanctuary of God. I want us to unmute and begin to appreciate God for this wonderful time and what the Lord has spoken to us. Let's just begin to appreciate God. Let's begin to appreciate God.
Thank you. Now we are grateful in the name of Jesus. God, Lord, continue to
Hallelujah.
this season. Oh, you will help us in Nigeria. Thank you, Mama. Nigeria too.
In Jesus' name. I want us also to thank God for the vessel he has used tonight.